Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Practitioner Scholar, a Penn Chief Learning Officer podcast. I am your host, Julio Zelaya. To familiarize you, for those who don't know, PennCLO is an executive doctoral program through the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education. The course of study focuses on organizational learning, leadership, and development, both within the public and private working sectors. It is also known as a Scholar Practitioner program, where there is an academic research component, meaning what is learned can be applied to the workplace through best practices. I'm a current student of the program, and our guest is an alumna of the program. In this edition, we will meet Dr. Marikay Forst. Dr. Marikay, can I call you Marikay?
Absolutely, Julio. That's what I prefer.
Great. So, my friends, our guest today is a distinguished leader with over 25 years of experience in learning and development, human resources, and organizational behavior, currently serving as a team effectiveness consultant and leadership coach. She brings valuable insights from her work from numerous organizations. Her impressive educational background includes a doctorate in workplace learning from the University of Pennsylvania, the Penn Chief Learning Officer program, a Master of Science in Group Process and Group Psychotherapy from Hahnemann University, and a bachelor's degree from both psychology and criminology from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Our topic for today is the role of organizational practices in encouraging dissent. In organizations that obtain dissent that makes a difference, leaders spend a lot of time and resources seeking views. It is a genuine interest hearing employees' views demonstrated through action and separates one organization from another. So welcome, Dr. Marikay Forst. Hello, Marikay.
Hello, Julio. Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. I love the CLO program and I love talking about this research.
Looking forward to our conversation today. So let's imagine back in the time where you were deciding to join the program. How do you find yourself sitting in a classroom at the PennCLO doctoral program?
Great question. So I, believe it or not, when I was 22 years old, finishing my bachelor's, I was accepted to a doctoral program and seriously considered going. And I was thinking to myself that for that particular program, I would finish when I'm 27. And I thought, oh, that's really old. 27's really old. So it's funny how your perspective changes. I thought I better get out in the world, get some professional experience, and do a master's instead. So that's what I did. Little did I know, years later, I would return to the classroom. So you mentioned my academic background. My professional background was in HR, eventually leading HR, and then returning to the same organization to lead learning and development. So I've been very fortunate in my career with opportunities, but I always had that interest in doctoral studies. I loved learning about something, applying it in the workplace, and I wanted to do that again. And so the PennCLO program attracted me because these were people with a lot of experience from all over the US, all over the world. And I decided I'm going to take just one course, which is not really recommended for a program like that, and see how it fits. And boy, did it fit. I just immediately joined this collaborative environment with a great network, great support, and I was immediately able to share tools and practices and bring those back to my workplace and then bring my work experience into the classroom. What a wonderful opportunity.
And I love the word you're saying, collaboration. So that brings everything both in your background and also from the group to your current work. So I'm curious, you have a background that combines psychology, group process, organizational development. How did those different areas lead you to your current work?
Yes. So those areas really helped me to look at organizations from a multi-level perspective. Sometimes we tend to look at individual performance, and there's so much more. There's so much more beyond the individual is the team. and the group dynamics come into play when we're looking at individuals. So it's so valuable for people to understand group dynamics. And I find that in leadership development programs, there's not always an emphasis or enough of an understanding of group dynamics. Likewise, another level. So what's going on with the organization? The larger organization affects the team, affects leaders. What's going on in the external environment? Take the pandemic. We saw and we continue to see how that has affected organizations down to the team. So I think bringing that perspective from all of the academic background to my work has been really important and has led, it sort of was along the path to this current topic.
So you were mentioning building a team and what a relevant term that is. But I understand from my research preparing for this program that you started as a one-person HR development. So you were your own team. So what happened in that journey? How do you progress about that learning and development phase? And tell us about that journey.
So I had such an opportunity early in my career at Lincoln Investment to go in as a one-person department and build processes and programs from the ground up. What an opportunity. So the organization was rapidly growing. And so I immediately was able to do some great work, create programs, and what a great culture it was to do that in. So I was able to hire a team over the years, and some of the programs we put in place are still at the company today. So very rewarding.
So this is very interesting to me and also for the audience because several people are considering taking a doctorate while they're working in a full-time work. And you completed your doctorate while leading the Learning and Development Initiative. So tell us, how do you balance everything, doing work, doing everything in the personal side, and also this doctoral program?
The balance is challenging. However, when you have support from your employer, support in your personal life, it really matters. That was the big thing for me. And also just figuring out, when am I going to do this extra work, right? So I think we've all experienced times in our workplaces where things are really busy. There's some big initiative going on, and it's sort of, you have to look at your whole life. It's similar to that. And for me, it was weekends. Weekends were critical for me to do my work. Some people did early morning before the workday started or at night after work. For me, it was the weekends and just sitting down and cranking out the work. And it was in a period of my life where I could do that. There was a point where I said, I hope I have friends and family when this dissertation is finished, because I had to say no to a lot of things that I would normally attend.
Okay, so you have to say no. And that gets into your research topic, dissent. What happens when you don't agree with something? So your dissertation explored organizational practices that encourage dissent. So what sparked that interest in particular in that topic?
So I think there were three main things when I think about it. So I worked for an organization where we thrived on dissent. It was healthy debate continuously about key decisions that had to be made. And I remember at one point, especially in the beginning, thinking, is this okay? Am I going to get fired? Like, am I saying too much? And in my performance review, I was told, Mary Kay, we really value that you'll disagree with us. Wow. I really flourished in an environment like that. I worked really hard to help the employees and the organization be successful.
Wow.
So
So it was
that's the
based
first.
on a tough conversation.
It was based on being in an environment where I saw multiple viewpoints and dissenting viewpoints help make critical decisions and how that process played out. So it gave me a curiosity about that, because I had worked in other environments that were a little bit different and I didn't see the same results. So that was my own curiosity. I also saw in other people, so the second thing that caused me to be interested in this topic was that I saw a reluctance on the part of people frequently to express their views. And I knew
Mhm.
how important it was, especially the people close to the work, to hear what they said, to hear the problems, to hear their view on potential solutions and what would work and what didn't work. And I remember working with one CEO who said to me, Mary Kay, I am just so disappointed. I met with this group. I told them what we were going to do, and not one person told me it was a bad idea. And it's only now, after the fact, that they're telling me they knew it wouldn't work. So I'm not happy with that. And so we talked about power dynamics and that how that can influence whether people will share information and what you can do about it. And we'll address that a little bit later today. The third thing that sparked my interest was more from just reading, listening to news and events that would happen in the world. And I can specifically remember the first time I was thinking about, did anybody see this coming? Did anybody voice a concern? So it was the Challenger tragedy, the space shuttle
Mhm.
tragedy that I had been reading about and was excited for, and then watched it unfold on TV, along with many children in classrooms around the world. It was the first time a teacher was going into space. People were very excited. And then the tragedy occurred. I think it was 73 seconds into the mission. It was just awful. And I remember being so sad, but starting to think, what could have been done differently? How can we prevent these types of things in the future? And we've all seen other crises unfold in the corporate world, in the public sector. And so I wanted to find out what we can do to improve decision making.
So we're hearing three very crucial events for you to define that research topic in particular. One is a conversation that some people might find very scary, a performance review, but then you got an aha moment. Like, okay, this is a great thing that I'm asking different sorts of questions. Then a conversation with a leader that basically said, I'm frustrated. People are not saying no to any of the ideas. So that's a common thing amongst leaders. And third, a tragedy that you were hearing in the news and something that struck every one of us that saw that news happening. So I understand that you designed a study with interviewing 30 leaders across 19 different organizations. So I must imagine there are surprising findings in that diverse set of leaders. What did you find interesting?
Yes, there were a lot of surprises. So one of the surprises is what I call dissent ambivalence. So some of the participants in the study shared it's really important to get dissent. It's really important to hear multiple views and to get important feedback. But sometimes in the same sentence, they would say, I want dissent, I don't want dissent. And it wasn't really conscious, but it brought out the human reality of hearing hard things. So
Mhm.
when a leader's working hard with the best intentions and they really think that they have a good idea, this is how we should do it, it's hard to hear other views. The ability to put in a process, the way to handle that is to have processes where it's a natural part to hear these dissenting views and also to train leaders on what to expect and that this is good leadership.
And so you're studying different organizations. So I'm curious, every organization has its own organizational culture, its own organizational history. How does that make a difference, the organizational culture and both history in the dissent process?
Yes, culture and history came out as strong influencers as to whether dissent is expressed. So I would say it was about 30% of the leaders in the study said, we have a culture that started from the beginning that still exists today. And so in some cases, that culture was this culture of people expressing their views all over the place. That was just, they actually said, it's in our DNA. That's how we do it. We will interview, if we have a decision to make, we'll interview 30 stakeholders. And if 15 of them disagree, we're going to go back and talk to everybody again. It's just part of what they do. Also, there were organizations that say, we're not really comfortable disagreeing with a leader. It's just not what we do. So this is, they say maybe it's history, maybe it's legacy. So that's telling you about culture and history and the influence. And one of the other, you had mentioned surprises in the study. Another surprise relates to culture, which is just how much people are considering consequences when they're sharing their views. It really struck me. We all know that this is something that sharing views can be hard in an organization for a variety of reasons. But just how strong that influencer was really surprising. One leader summed it up and said, I think people think that I want this job more than I want to express my opinion. So it just goes to show you how important creating a culture that encourages viewpoints is when you have that kind of thoughts about consequences.
So I'm curious, on the other side of the coin, that there is a lot of research on conformity. So how does this research relate to your findings?
Yes, conformity is another very strong influencer. And the research on conformity, starting back with ASH, the ASH study, which has been replicated many times, is that if even one person in a group will disagree, then other people are much more likely to disagree. So we've all sat in meetings where people have held back and everyone knows that everyone else disagrees with a certain course of action, but there's silence. If one person breaks that silence, you're more likely to get a conversation and people expressing their views. So conformity is very powerful.
So I'm curious on one of your key findings, and you were saying that power dynamics and the consequences are barriers to effective dissent. So people need to have that psychological safety in order for them to dissent. So how can organizations address those variables, power and also consequences?
Yes. So one of the other things that came out of the study was that when senior leaders model encouraging dissent, others in the organization are more likely to encourage it. So teaching senior leaders about the value of dissent and how to encourage it through practices, through words. So when somebody is presenting a proposed initiative, instead of putting on a screen, this is a diagram of what we can do, how we're handling this. What do you think? Even better is to start with what's the problem or opportunity and asking people, what are some ways we can solve this? Or what are some ways to go with the decision? And getting the input first. If you have to present something and you feel like you have to go a certain way, show it, but don't make it a done deal. This is a common mistake, that this is what we're going to do. But I want your feedback. Give me your feedback. No, if you have to present it, something that's partially, say, I really want to know what other alternatives should we be considering? What could work about this? What could fail? So teaching leaders how to approach change and from the very beginning and how to have a decision-making processes are really critical. So if you have a process for making a decision and you include upfront discussion, debate about alternatives, you're going to be able to manage some of those barriers.
So the magic seems to be in the design. Great. So this is a program that both changes you as a scholar and as a researcher, but also as a practitioner. So I understand you've applied this research to your work as a team effectiveness consultant, as a leadership coach. Can you share some of the examples of your applied research in your day-to-day consulting work?
Yes. So when organizations choose that they would like more feedback, for example, they might have seen on their engagement survey certain areas of concern. But what do you do about that? So that's always a challenge. And say they take some steps, but the next year they're getting the same feedback. So I've been able to work with organizations and leaders and teams, sometimes in small ways and sometimes in big ways, sometimes just tweaking a few practices. A lot of organizations hold town hall meetings, but how you deliver the town hall, how much time you spend sharing your organizational information versus asking for input and feedback, and having ways for employees to share or to ask questions. So sometimes little tweaks, or how often do you have those town halls? What's the format? And if you only have town halls, but you aren't talking to people in smaller groups, maybe you have to look at that. So there are many ways to apply, because now there are a lot of critical incidents out there in the literature, but then from real organizations today, knowing the practices that work, finding out what organizations, what do they want to do, and then working with them to make sure they get results.
So it all comes down to design once more. How do you design even a town hall? If you permit that those chances of people participating, if you ask the questions, and also what do you do with the answers you're getting? So it's fascinating to me. So what role do you see in organizations? What would be your main recommendations as key practices? You were saying examples in town hall meetings. What other key practices should organizations do to foster healthy dissent?
So we want to make sure the leaders understand, why would you want to hear dissent, right? Why would you want to hear this hard information? So educating people on the value of dissenting views and feedback, and then what to do with that information when you get it. Also, a lot of time for critical new initiatives, use a facilitator in the early stages when you're trying to have debates, because leaders need to kind of be able to hear what people say. When you're facilitating, you're not picking up on body language, you're not hearing everything. Some organizations have the leader speak last. If I'm a leader and I come in and I'm excited about an idea, what's the likelihood that the people in the room are going to tell me that they have different thoughts? So being aware of that, so much is education, but also having these practices in place that can encourage debate and dissent. One of the things that happens is, for a key decision, sometimes that decision is listed as one item on a long agenda, and maybe there's like 10 or 15 minutes given to that, or maybe less too if it's at the end of the agenda and the meeting is running long. Having times and space to just discuss important decisions, right? It might take time, but it can save a lot of time in the long run, preventing mistakes, creating innovation. So time, space, and techniques to actually bring about the views up front. When you look at the research, most organizations consider only one or two options when making a key decision. That's pretty amazing.
Wow. And it was mind-blowing for me to hear that you just need one person to say they're not in agreement for that to start a very important conversation. But the other thing that struck my attention is what you were saying, this needs to happen before the launch, before the town hall, before the meeting, because you have to make sure that's into the design. Because you're absolutely right. If the CEO begins to share with enthusiasm a great idea, it's not a safe place anymore to say, you know what, I don't like this. You need to make sure you read the room in that sense. So that I find very applicable and very profound. So let's look ahead, my dear Mary Kay. What changes do you think organizations need to change We're in changing times, technology, politics. We're seeing a lot of challenges in every sense of the word, both for leaders and organizations. What do you think they need to take into account to handle dissent and also decision making?
Yes, just the knowledge of the value of hearing from people who think differently is
Hmm.
incredibly valuable. Not easy, but great leaders do that. And as a matter of fact, so when you study this topic, one of the things that Irving Janis studied was the Kennedy administration. So when John F. Kennedy first became president, he made a critical decision that was a disaster. And when they analyzed it, they came to the conclusion that he had a group of people surrounding him that had valuable information, but they didn't want to go against the decision. So he decided to completely change things. And he was able to find ways and practices to make sure that everybody's view was heard so he could make a better decision in the future. And he did. He did with his next big decision.
Wow. So sometimes you already have that key part of information within your own team, but you're not hearing it, or the process is not designed in a way that you as a leader might get that dissent in opinion. Wow. We've uncovered several great topics, both on the research side, but also very applicable to everyday life. So, Mary Kay, you've studied organizations that successfully encourage dissent. What practices stand out as particularly effective?
Good question, Julio. So there are so many practices, but I think what I can do is just highlight three categories of practices. So one is just this idea of having a decision-making process. And part of that process is talking about options vigorously before you get into making the decision, vetting decisions. So organizations in the study shared many things. I'll highlight a few. We talked about having a facilitator for these conversations. There are a lot of interesting things. Some leaders will say, we want one option for this decision on this end of the extreme, and now we want an option on the other extreme, and then let's look at two in the middle. Some organizations will assign roles, so they'll have people as sponsors for each option. Make sure they have enough time for debate. Some leaders say, we want to make sure every one of you is heard. If you have a view that hasn't been shared today, we need to hear from you. So there are many processes. There are some even to limit if there's somebody in the room who talks a lot. You know, this one organization shared they give chips. And so if you used your chips, that's it. You don't get to say anymore. So interesting. And even just different sayings or hand gestures when a certain part of the conversation is kind of going on too long, there's nothing else fruitful coming from that conversation, how to end that. So how to take a break when things get too emotional, how to keep conflict task oriented and not personal, very critical. So that's one area of practice of all these tools for having the debate, bringing forth dissenting views. That's one. Another area often overlooked are interviews and focus groups, collecting data and using a person who knows how to synthesize that data to provide actionable plans for organizations. Very critical. That organization I mentioned that had it in their DNA to collect information, they didn't have fancy practices, but they constantly interviewed people, and using an impartial interviewer, if possible, is the best. And then finally, there's another category is events. You can have an internal innovation contest or hackathon. You're asking the people who are closest to the customer or closest to the work, what's going on? What are some pain points? How would you solve it? They can do it in teams or as individuals. This gets the senior leadership to look at every idea, to learn about the pain points they may not be aware of, and actually have the participants present when they're chosen and to give them rewards for doing this kind of work, and it can be fantastic. It takes time, effort, but we've been told by a lot of the leaders this really pays off for the organization. So those are 3 areas of practice, just to give you just a flavor for some of the practices that came out of the research.
So one of my main conclusions is that having healthy dissent might not happen by chance. It happens by design. And you were saying the right processes, the right design in place, also the right data collection points. And last but not least, the right events for me to collect those data points and feed them into a process. That was great.
Thank you, Julio. I love how you summed that up. I think it's really valuable to look at it that way.
So, Marikay, we always in this podcast like to ask one key question. And this is based on your best advice. And what is the best advice that you have received, or maybe a piece of advice you usually give to others as your best pearl of wisdom?
So I would say 2 things. One is to move towards instead of away from those who disagree with you. It's ask questions. Think of yourself as someone who's trying to gather information instead of trying to advocate for your own view. Really trying to understand other perspectives. It makes us better. In the study, there were organizations who can literally point to having debates and listening to multiple views that help them make an important decision. There was one organization, for example, that they were looking for platforms for one of their key products. And they were leaning towards this one platform. It was very polished. They had a relationship with this company. The people who came in were very polished. However, there was some dissent to say, you know what, this one over here, this platform, it's a lesser known platform. The company's not as established. But if we look deeply at these features, this is going to catapult us into the future. We're going to have this innovative platform for our customers first. And so that was really powerful for me. So I would say on a small scale and a large scale, move towards disagreement, not away from it. And also, when we work hard to hire really intelligent, good people. Let's get their ideas. It's more satisfying for the employee when they can share views and use their skills. And it also benefits the organization. And that's what I love about this work. What's good and right for the employee is also right for the organization. So those are the 2 things I would say.
Wow. So, what a masterclass for leaders. We need to value different perspectives, but also make sure we're designing the process for those perspectives to be put in the table. Sometimes we're not hearing, sometimes we have the key to that key decision we're about to take, but we're not listening. And maybe we have the answers there, but the process is not designed in a way to foster healthy dissent. Marikay, thank you again for your time. This has been a truly inspirational and motivational session. So for anyone who would like to contact you or follow your work, what's the best way to do so?
Yes, so you can link in with me and send a message, and I'll get back to you. You can contact me at my email, marikay@marikayforst.com, or on my website at marikayforst.com.
Thank you, Marikay. This was great, but it's a wrap. Thanks again, Marikay, and thanks to everyone for joining another session of the Practitioner Scholar, a Penn Chief Learning Officer podcast. Until the next time.
Thank you so much, Julio, for having me on today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of this research, and I really appreciate your thoughtful questions.